Welcome everybody. It is Business Monday here in downtown Providence on GoLocal Live. Sun is shining. It's a balmy, 41 degrees down here. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO of GoLocal. With me is the money man, Gary Sass. Cha-ching, I think is really the only appropriate way to introduce you, is with the words cha-ching.
Somebody has to interpret that.
It's all about the money. Let's talk money. Just had a small business person on earlier today, runs a commercial painting company, has 18 employees, said he could be 40 if he could find a skilled workforce, talented workforce. We have small business people on all the time. They say the number one issue in this economy is skilled workforce. We've got a new education commissioner coming in from New York, named by Governor Raimondo today. Is it put up or shut up time, or should we just outsource education to the state of Massachusetts?
Well, it's been put up and shut up time for 20 years. So,
and we have not put up.
No, that's the sad part. We have put up. We have put up additional money. We put in place a school aid formula. We just tore it down and didn't have one for several years, but then we put it back in place, and it was a decent formula. It can be fixed a little bit right now.
Yeah.
We also put in high stakes testing. We didn't put in place evaluation.
We put in 3 sets of high.
Yeah. We had to put the first one in first. I chaired a commission for several governors, which recommended pretty much what Massachusetts did before Massachusetts did it. We started down that path, and we did not have the political will, take the political heat, so we changed it. So it's a misnomer to think that people haven't been aware and concerned about this problem for a long time. We just have not had the leadership to get anything done. And it even becomes more problematic because we have 2 school systems in the state. People think we have 36. Nah, we have 2. And the 2 are school systems for poor kids, minorities, and disadvantaged kids. And then we have a school system for the rest of the state. Neither is doing great compared to their peer groups, but the one where the workforce is, where the population is growing, is doing worse. We have the biggest gap between English-speaking and Hispanic, Latino-speaking students, I think, in the United States. It's a huge gap. So yeah, we know what to do. We have not had the political will to do it. Godspeed for this new commissioner, that she will be a strong leader and get it done. But no commissioner is going to succeed unless the leadership of the legislature is willing to say, we support the commissioner, we back up what he or she is going to do, and we're not going to politicize the process which they have.
So I think in my lifetime we've had 5 commissioners, I'm going to say. They all came in with tremendous resumes, great track records. They were all innovators, leaders. They had reformed things. They'd had great success in other places, and they all limped out of here, battered, bruised, and with little reputation in hand. Obviously, the newest version of the standardized statewide testing system showed that Rhode Island is remarkably, almost shockingly far behind Massachusetts. Why will this be? The governor's office sent out quotes from everybody from Gandhi to President Trump. It was maybe the most absurd email from this governor's office. Came out after the press release with quotes from numerous people, mostly out of state, who knew her.
Any business leaders in Rhode Island?
I don't think so.
See, there's an interesting question about how this process has been handled in Rhode Island.
I'll pull it up.
Well, we have a board of education.
Right.
We have a council on elementary and secondary education. You know, I can remember when Deborah Gist was hired, I was with the Curie administration, and we relied heavily on the board of education and Bob Flanders, who was chairman of it. Here we have a situation where we have a board of education, we have a council for secondary, post-secondary education, and the governor's made the hire. And it's hard to develop the backstop for a commissioner unless the board is there from day one. Now, I don't doubt that the board will be there, but the question is, do we have strong civic leadership in trying to reform education? The place for strong civic leadership has always been the boards, and that doesn't appear to exist right now. It's a challenge. That's why I was curious.
No, nobody from the business community, nobody from the education community in Rhode Island. 8 people from out of state tied to education who had some knowledge of her. Mayor Diosa and Jim Vincent, and that's it.
Well,
So clearly,
no, there's a question there, because the support that really matters, and not 8 wise men that come from, a distance away.
Chancellor of New York.
Yeah, Commissioner Wagner was highly recommended by the Chancellor of New York.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what that.
Wagner was going to fix. Wasn't Wagner going to fix everything? I got to pull up that press release.
Well, it's interesting that so I discount these out of state. They have their own fraternity or sorority, and that's their business. It's interesting too that the 2 people in Rhode Island that spoke out right away, were somebody who represents the NAACP and Mayor of Central Falls, and this commissioner's job is to serve all the people. So if there was going to be comments.
No disrespect to the mayor of Central Falls, but the mayor of Central Falls oversees a school department that is completely 100% funded by the state of Rhode Island.
It's run by the state of Rhode Island.
It is run by the state of Rhode Island and is last in all rankings and has been for the better part of 30 years since the state took it over.
And blame the state, because I was there at the beginning, and this is an interesting story people don't tell. Tommy Lazier was mayor of Central Falls at the time.
Right.
And they were as broke then as they were when they went into bankruptcy. They couldn't afford to operate their school. And so the state agreed to take it over. I think their responsibility was still for the capital cost of the system, but the state agreed to take over the operation, and it was going to be run by this Department of Education. The philosophy was that this would be a hell of an investment because we had a very strong professional Department of Education, and they would operate this as a demonstration school. It was the perfect size. At that time, I think it had an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school, and the Department of Education operated just as bad as any bureaucracy could operate it. So instead of getting the synergies and the opportunity to use that school to see what you could do to help minority kids and poor kids, they ran it into the ground. So it wasn't the Central Falls people.
And in one fairness to Rhode Island, Massachusetts tried it in a couple of instances of state control over local. And Lowell and Springfield maybe for a while.
Springfield was so poor. I don't know if the courts intervened there or not.
But and neither one of those were wild successes. But this has been an abomination, not only an abomination for 30 years, no effort to correct it.
Well, I don't know if they have. Let's see, when you make statements like there's no effort to correct it.
Well, the test scores indicate that there's been no material improvement in the quality of the education.
Well, yeah, that's so. We'll see.
Are you surprised when really almost large or small employer speaks out about the need for a better educated workforce, that there was no appear to be formal process, certainly not publicly disclosed, in which the business community was a partner in selecting who the next commissioner of education would be?
Business communities need to be a partner. They should be consulted, and I don't know they were not consulted.
Certainly, I said publicly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not just consulting the poobahs. It's not consulting the 5 biggest businesses in the state. It's consulting
small businesses.
Some small businesses. So that's disappointing. But that's why the hiring of a commissioner, still is the case, was always left to the board. There was a very clear distinction in state law that the commission would be hired by the board. Now, none of us are naive or fell off the cabbage truck last night. So every governor, going back for decades, has been actively involved in the hiring of the commissioner. And so that was understood, but still the process was led by the board, and the board, whether informally or formally, use their contacts in the community to get some kind of assessment, some kind of evaluation. This seems to have been a very top-down process.
Without a doubt.
And so there are benefits and there are liabilities.
Just to juxtapose, in Massachusetts, she was also a finalist for the top education position. That was a very public process. There was lots of opportunities for the media and for education advocates in the business community to interview all 3 of the finalists during that review process.
Well, I can just talk about what happens on university campuses. And when it gets down to the point that there are 2 or 3 finalists left, And there are a lot of good people that withdrew because they didn't want to go through the public part of the
Yeah,
process.
sure.
They felt their job at home might have been jeopardized. But those that choose to go through the public process, have to be interviewed. They're interviewed by student groups. They're interviewed by faculty groups, alumni groups. It's a very, very public process. The process here, there was no indication that that happened publicly. Whether it happened privately or not, I don't know.
That all may be changing at colleges and universities. They may adopt some of their other new strategies of just having bribery take place. So if you want to be the college president at Williams, you just write a check to Williams for $5 million to the selection committee and you're in.
Those are the kids.
Oh, it's just left for the kids. Let's take a short visit down to Washington, D.C. Your president, our president.
Our president. He's owned by all of us. We're all responsible. There's no free lunch on that one.
He has had. It's one of the most interesting, certainly, political periods of time in which someone who has negatives, record negatives, only has the support of about 30% have said they would vote for him for re-election. But the Democrats may bungle this so badly that there is a chance that he could win and win with a significant plurality if the Democratic Party insists on going left, left, left.
Oh, let me tell you, there was a editorial this morning in the Wall Street Journal, a columnist, not an editorial, and that's the exact point that was made. People want to talk about fixing Obamacare. They don't want to give their insurance. People don't want their taxes, boosted again. The fact is, unemployment is pretty low compared to national standards. The recovery continues. It'll change at a certain point. And this is what people realize. So when these guys come out with the new Green Deal, or I wrote a piece on why Medicare for All was a fraud. It was radicalization was impossible to administer. Those things will be heard. And so the only thing that Trump has going for him is the possible loony left. And the adults in the party recognize that. Mm-hmm. Nancy Pelosi, if you on a scale of 1 to 10, if you're great now, you give her a 10. She's been acting like an adult and trying to bring the party back to the center.
But at the end of the day, money drives these things. The leading candidates out of the Democratic, there's 12 announced Democrats. The top 3 fundraisers in their first 24 hours are our friend Mr. Rourke, who raised $6.1 million, a record in the first 24 hours. Bernie Sanders, former socialist mayor of Burlington, Vermont, $5.9 million. And the third is Kamala Harris, a distant, and the most moderate of the 3, the most distant. She's for socializing healthcare, but she's the most distant of the 3 at 1.7 or $1.9 million. The money isn't chasing Klobuchar and other more moderates.
The system is dysfunctional on both sides. So in the Republican Party, 80% of Republicans back Trump. Now those are not the 80% of the Republicans that I grew up with. And they're solid. When Trump said he could go down Madison Avenue and shoot somebody and they wouldn't care, they wouldn't. And so that's 80%. So the party's become, I don't want to say radicalized, but it's pushed to that extreme. Democrats have the same problem with the people that you just mentioned, the proposals that they're making. And there was a poll, because I've been working on this issue, and No Labels has, and we have something called Unity 2020 Agenda, which you'll hear about. But this is what the Harris poll said as recently as September of 2018. So it's about 5-6 months old. 80% people feel that Congress won't work because it has an all-or-nothing mentality, and nothing gets done. 80% want Democrats and Republicans to reach compromise to solve problems, and 70% are totally disgusted with the system. And the reason they give that they're disgusted with the system is that both parties, as we were just talking about, both parties are controlled by their extremes. Mm-hmm. Okay, so at some point, it's like chess. If you want to win a chess game, you control the center of the board. And at some point, it comes back to the Democrats being...
But that's in the general. I get all that, 100% agree. but the Democrats have to go through the primary process. They go to Iowa, big lefty state. Go to New Hampshire. Who votes in a Democratic primary? That's about as left-wing as you get.
You're right.
So, by the way, there's no firewall in the Democratic primary. It's just, it's the moderate Democrat is not likely to vote in the Democratic primary and gets more and more isolated. Joe Biden made this slip up this weekend. I think there were two components to it. Everybody caught the second one. They missed the first part. He is speaking before a crowd in Delaware, and he says, I have the most progressive record of anybody running for president, and everybody jumps on that he said he's running for president. So that was the news, that he's running. Corrected himself immediately. What the media didn't report on was that he said that I have the most progressive record. Now, that's two issues tied there. One, he's not the most progressive Democrat, and had at different times was a very moderate to somewhat conservative Democrat at different times.
He was a Democrat. The other thing he said, which you didn't know, was that he was the most progressive Democrat because this new left would lose the election to Trump. And so the Democrat Party has to decide, and I think this is a seminal issue. It never gets down to personalities. Does the Democrat Party, want to pander to their extreme interests, or do they want to get rid of Trump? You got a choice. If the Democratic Party gets behind a moderate candidate, the odds are pretty good that they'll pick up those states they lost in close elections in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, and everything else stayed equal. If everything else stayed equal, which I'm not sure it would, they would elect the next president. And those are big odds. If you went to Vegas and bet that, there would be big odds. The only thing that gets in the way of that are the loony left. And so, the new Green Deal. I can't even say these things.
The new Green Deal.
Yeah, Medicare for all. Not having the ability as a party to stand up and condemn anti-Semitism. Since 1933, that should be pretty easy. That's not a complicated ask.
Today up at Brown at lunchtime, Kate Nagel is up there, broadcast it live. Tom Perez, Democratic National Chairman, and Michael Steele, the former Republican National Chair, a more moderate voice of the Republican Party, debated what policies there were. And really, both those issues, I did not hear Tom Perez at any point during that say, be careful, Democrats. Do not go too far left. We'll be a marginalized party in 2020. He is not hitting that. He may think it. He says it privately, I hear, but he is not hitting the panic button.
I'll tell you something very interesting. I'm exploring this right now, so I don't know where it's going to go. We have a third candidate possibly running.
Yeah.
His name is Howard Schultz.
Right.
Howard Schultz is a Democrat. Howard Schultz is central left. Let's say I would put him in the lexicon of being left of center, not way far left. It's very hard for a third party, to win. But if the Democratic Party goes where it is and the Republican Party stays with Trump, you have the real potential not of the third party candidate winning, but of the third party candidate being a real spoiler in this thing and causing the race to be unpredictable. Because the polling data is very clear, and that's why there's so political malaise in the country is people on both sides want moderation. They want compromise. Now, Republicans want compromise to be center-right. They want it on the right side. Democrats want it on the left side. But they're not to the point where they're shooting at each other. There's such extremes. And we've created a political atmosphere in this country, where people look at you and say, "You're a Republican? You can't marry my daughter." And I'm sure it's true on the other side as well. And that's what people are trying to break their way through. So I don't know what's going to happen. I know the party structure is broken. The primary systems don't work anymore. Nobody wants to go back to the way we picked President Truman in 1944. I know. I had a relative in the Blackstone Hotel in Chicago, and there were a bunch of old guys sitting around, and they said this Wallace thing is never going to cut it. We can't have a socialist president of the United States, and they picked what now people consider to be a pretty good choice, a pretty good president. Well, no one wants to go back to those smokeful days. There wasn't diversity. There wasn't transparency. There were a lot of things today that could never happen then. but you can't have a primary structure set up in such a way where effectively it's rigged. In our side, on the Republican side, today it's rigged for Trump because they have complete control of the RNC, they have complete control of that machinery.
And Republicans who don't agree with him, privately speak adversely about him, are afraid to death of him if they want to run for re-election.
And that's an interesting question because I know, on the vote on the emergency override, there were 12 Republicans that voted with the Democrats, not because they disagreed with the president on national security and the wall, but they disagreed with presidential versus congressional powers. There were 4 or 5 other Republicans that were going to vote, with with the majority, and bring that total well over 60, and probably not enough to sustain a veto. And their political job was more important to them. I should be tolerant and understand that, but their political job was more important to them than doing what
they weren't going to bet the ranch. They weren't going to take the political hit.
Because,
they weren't,
because they knew they couldn't sustain a veto.
Right.
And so 4 or 5 said, "I can't sustain a veto. Why do I need a primary challenger?"
Right.
But that's so the system is both broken, but also the quality of leadership. And we've gotten into a motif and a mood that these political jobs are career jobs, they're lifetime jobs. It used to be the case that politics was real, but if you went back home, you still had a business to go to or a law practice.
That's
or
right.
Something. And these guys just don't want
Your
to go
family
back.
owned a farm. You ran a hardware store, actually, on the house side especially. Last segment, let's go to this Kaufman index that came out a couple weeks ago. I don't know that anybody, we're writing on it for tomorrow. It's a major research analysis of how states are functioning in innovation, creating new business segments, supporting startups, and Rhode Island did not perform particularly well.
When you say not perform particularly well, you had 49 states in one index, and you had Rhode Island. We were so far behind the curve on this that you had to look up, look down. You couldn't find it.
It's one of those indexes where we're really down there. Not only are we behind Connecticut, which is always a danger zone if you're in the Northeast, but I think we're down there with like Mississippi. And anytime you're in the same peer group as Mississippi, you're in a boatload of trouble.
Well, there was an index. I don't want to bore people with the technical things, but Rhode Island on the index was a negative 2.93, and it was the only.
Is that the president calling you after hearing your comments?
Which president? It was the rating, the index was a negative 2.93. That was the only state to have a negative index rating in excess of 2. I mean, it wasn't close. And the 2 things. The first thing is the Ewing Kauffman Foundation is very prestigious. They have about a $2 billion endowment. There are about 85 people that work there. It is totally nonpartisan.
It's not ideological. This is a business analysis.
Right. But their only ideology, they do have an ideology, and their ideology is this: they promote education and entrepreneurship. And they give out a lot of grants and assistance to potential entrepreneurs and to educators. Been around since 1966. So
right.
they are the coin of the realm. They're prestigious, and they publish, as you pointed out, each year an entrepreneurship index. They've changed it a little bit this year. And the index looks at basically 3 things. They look at the number of jobs created per 1,000 people. Innovation in Massachusetts creates 6 jobs per 1,000 people. In the United States, it's almost 5.5 jobs. In Rhode Island, it's less than 4 jobs.
Right.
This is why we get down. They look at the percentage of population going into business. They're all very small numbers, but ours is less than 1/5 of 1%. Massachusetts is more than 1/3 of 1%. That'll kind of give you a relative degree. And they look at the sustainability of these startup companies, and we're again behind, not as far as some of the other industries, but we're pretty far behind the curve. So by every measurement of entrepreneurship, by a nonpartisan, fairly objective, historical measure, we're not even close. It's not a question of being in the mix somewhere. We're not even close. And I think I come back to one of my old whipping boys on that thing is, we're not about, we're not, our Commerce Rhode Island Department and our economic development paradigm is about tax incentives, preferential tax deals, real estate. We have a number of programs that deal, with innovation. If you go on their website, we have an innovation voucher program. We have the Innovate Rhode Island Fund. We have a number of things that have, promise of the kinds of things you do. You look at how many grants they give out. You look at the number of dollars involved. It's embarrassing. It's not only not at scale. It clearly shows that that's not what our priority is. And so, if you
But is there a little chicken and egg? They're on in the earlier hour, and they bring forth small businesses who have gotten some of those grants.
Yeah.
Are there enough entrepreneurs? Do we just have enough entrepreneurs who, as you say, in that number, there's only a third of, 0.2% of 0.2 of less than half of what Massachusetts is producing in entrepreneurs?
No, I would just take the whole entire United States. They produce twice. This is for the other 49 states. They produce twice what we produce, and that does includes New York as well as Mississippi. New York does very well. California does.
But that's my point. That the rest of the country may have it more. Is it some of it? Is an element of it that we're an industrial state where people from generations worked in mills. They didn't think about starting their own businesses.
Well, there's a lot of history and culture. People worked in mills, all over. But the point being that if you want an innovation economy, which we've talked about, we sold the I-195 district as the innovation economy. No one defined innovation. But if you think there's something out there with innovation, if you start programs to encourage small business, and you feel like you're behind, if you're a football team, and you haven't got the fastest halfback or the quarterback with the best arm or the best offensive line to block for those guys, then you invest more, you practice harder, you work harder, you give it a higher priority. We've just done the opposite. And it also ties back to something else. This is the cultural part, which is tricky. It's respect for the quality of education output. So there's not one silver bullet, but they're all pieces that are interconnected. More focus on education, more support for our universities. We have a very good flagship university. University of Rhode Island has a lot of very good programs.
And as a percentage, we are one of the worst states at supporting with state revenue in supporting its state education.
And let me tell you one way we could fix it without costing the taxpayers a whole lot of money. Why isn't there an independent board of trustees for the University of Rhode Island where they could bring in, there's some very prestigious alumni that have come from the university, that they could bring in these prestigious alumni, put them on the board, not have them go through a silly ratification process,
right.
Have them more flexibility in raising money. They only get about 10% of their money from the state. Excuse me. That's not going to change.
And we don't raise much privately for the state university versus many state universities who pile it up.
And their capital fund now is doing better than past capital drives. But the point being, if it had its own board of trustees, if it could appoint prestigious people, alumni of the university, had national, international contacts, you can make a hell of a difference. What do you think? You think anyone would take my proposal that there be a separate board of trustees for the University of Rhode Island and really make it a great flagship university serious? No, because they want the political influence to approve people on the board. They want whatever other political influence they get. So that's the culture. It's the culture of education. It's the culture of knowing a guy. Those are the things that affect it. But knowing that you live in that environment, and other states live in that environment as well, you invest more. You recognize if innovation economy is the future, if the changing nature of work is the future, then you invest more in that. You don't spend all your time, chasing hotels and chasing real estate. You spend some of your time doing that, but I think there's a misguided prioritization in addressing that whole problem of innovation and entrepreneurship, and the Kauffman poll demonstrates it.
With that, Gary Sass, the Money Man, thank you very much. We covered it all.
We did.
I think at the end of the day, it comes down to K through 12. You make improvements on K through 12. It solves a lot of problems all the way through the pipeline.
Just make sure when a kid gets out of the third grade, he or she can read, and you're going to be there.
Yep. Gary Sass, thanks so much. Tomorrow we'll be back. Kate Nagel's got the afternoon shift. If you haven't seen the excerpts from Michael Steele, former head of the Republican National Committee, and Tom Perez, who's the Democratic National Chairman. That interchange up at Brown University today. It's on Facebook now. It's getting moved over to the site presently. Take a look at that. I think it's an interesting insight. Two smart people care about America, talking about what some of the challenges are. We'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Thanks everybody for tuning in to Go Local Live Business Monday edition. Thank you.